They maintain the solid how they feel. Directly tells you how to become close. You're purposely partial. The founder of the Illuminati in 1776, what was the goal? Well, what he said was enlightenment of man. But if you read between the lines, now forget that, just read and listen to what he said. It was a one world government, a theme that continues to this day. Now, does that mean it's the Illuminati today, or is it just that there's this common view that the elite know better than the masses? And what's good...
You guys ain't catch how he laughed right there. Pay attention to that. They'll never tell you what they really want you to know. They just tell you enough to pay for this stuff. This right here is actually a paid video, paid subscription to see stuff like this. But I'm sharing it with y'all under the commentary law. And but pay attention to them because I don't know how long this, I'm able to. Watch how he laugh before he say it. Controlling the masses.
The Illuminati today, or is it just that there's this common view that the elite
right there? Did you catch it?
Better than the masses, and what's good is determined by a few. Now today, look no further. I don't worry about the Illuminati. I don't worry about the Bilderberg so much.
He's a part of it.
I don't worry about the Freemasonry. I worry about who's in our face on the news every day. The World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the American presidency. These are corrupt organizations. Listen to Obama talk about in his speech how the common people are not able to dictate what's best for them. How can we let organizations continue to try and dictate how the masses should live? So
keep in mind, the Obama administration was the administration that legalized gay marriage, a straight abomination, against the Lord, to the Lord, in Leviticus. I think chapter 19, verse 20 through 28, it talks about it somewhere in the Bible. Man should not lay with mankind, woman should not lay with womankind. And the whole Michelle running in 2028, I believe Michelle might be a dude named Michael. I don't know this for a fact because it's so secrecy and all this stuff going on, but that's what I think and I believe. And y'all fell for it when y'all went out there and voted for Obama because his administration legalized gay marriage, and that's abomination against the Lord. I don't care what color he is. You don't put nobody before God.
Are part of the original Bavarian Illuminati. That remains to be seen. But what we do know is that those very ideals are being pursued to this day. Even more fascinating to many people than the Freemasons, who, are real. You can't deny their reality. In some ways more frightening, more insidious. The Illuminati. So you're also talking about the Illuminati. The Illuminati just aren't some people, some weirdos in a log doing things you don't approve of. No, the Illuminati apparently are the people who some people think run the world, want to run the world. The evil.
He's more credible.
Universal conspiracy bent on.
You don't laugh or snicker about some of the stuff that they're talking about.
The agenda
him.
Of the world order. Again, speculating.
Forgive me, I'm a little under the weather.
What the policies they're proposing are about. You're called a racist. You're called an extremist. But what we're seeing
is some truth to that.
Concerted effort to break down family values. The introduction of things like Trans Day on Easter Sunday, 15-minute cities, the ability to not have a choice about what you put in your arm or not if you want to keep your job.
Or even go to a homeless shelter.
The control that the agenda is trying to implement is underway with the theme of it's selfish to think about your individual rights. You're selfish. That's not being selfish. It's just there's nothing that we have in this world that hasn't been taxed. And if you look at what they're trying to achieve, it's clearly a totalitarian one world government. It's not an extremist speculation. It's actually the words that they're saying and the policies that they're administering. Not only were accused of performing satanic rituals back when they were originally founded, sort of the 18th century and into the 19th century, and thus they went underground, right? They were getting a lot of abuse, as most secret societies were. But people still attributed their presence to things like the French Revolution, the Battle of Waterloo, the assassination of JFK.
Oh yeah, that's true. They might not admit to it on this channel though.
Hollywood,
on this video.
Things get attributed subvertly to the Illuminati. Whether real or imagined, it is a catch-all scapegoat for anything nefarious. The real Illuminati, if you want to find them,
in their defense, you know, they gotta spin it off like a conspiracy, or else they wouldn't even let them make this video, even though it's a paid video that you have to pay to see.
Recent time in history is in the late 18th century, same period as the French and American revolutions, and in Bavaria. Okay? Wasn't even Germany, just in southern Germany, in Bavaria, and you have the Bavarian Illuminati, or as it was also known, the Order of Perfectibilists. Some members of the elite are corrupt. Surprise, surprise. And they belong to secretive organizations. These individuals exploit their power to engage in unethical practices shielded by the confidentiality of their organizations. For instance, Freemasonry, with its secret rituals and meetings, provides the perfect cover for these activities. While groups like the Illuminati and the Bilderberg Group also convene discreetly to discuss global strategies. I started my policing career as a uniform officer in the ghettos of South East London. I then progressed to the West End. From there, I got offered a position, a really elite position, to join the ancient thing of policing on the River Thames. It was the first police unit ever in the world, and that was the Thames Police of London. I always wanted to join this unit, as I wanted, my main aspiration was to become a diver. I love swimming, I love diving, and I thought that I could join this unit as a patrol officer, relinquish my detective status, go back to uniform patrol, and then eventually become a diver. And that would also help with my parenting, as I had 4 young children at home, and it was quite tight working shift patterns, and especially on investigations. And one day I was approached by the sergeant, the detective sergeant that ran the intelligence unit for the division. And he said to me, "John, what are you doing working here?" He said, "You're more of a street copper, more of a hands-in pockets merchant." He said, "I could deal with someone like you for a sensitive inquiry." I decided to help him, but I had to use the utmost discretion. And what the job was tracking down transient paedophiles that had escaped the provisions of the Sex Offenders Registry Act, which came out in 1997, requiring all sex offenders, if they were convicted, cautioned, or released from serving a prison sentence for sex crimes, and that they had to sign at a local police station what's known as the Sex Offenders Register. So basically the police would know all their movements and be able to monitor them. But there was a loophole, and intelligence had come from the prison system that the best way to avoid any interaction with the police and signing this register was to go and live on a canal boat. The information that had been received by the Scotland Yard's Central Paedophile Unit, that there were 2 paedophiles living on canal boats within the London area. My job was to track down 2 more, if possible, and that was seen as a heavy task in the next month. If that was achieved, then they would be very, very happy. Within a month, instead of finding 2, I'd found 90 paedophiles.
That's crazy.
On the inland walkway network of London, all of which
Epstein Island
to sign on the Sex Offenders Register. This information was fed back to Scotland Yard's Central Paedophile Unit, and they were flabbergasted. What was put together was a national operation to extend this further out of London. and for me to keep looking for more sex offenders. So I go to these national intelligence meetings, and it really opened my eyes to the sheer extent of paedophilia. I'd never really given it much of a thought, and I didn't think it was a major issue. And I started working with one detective who basically spent his whole policing career at Scotland Yard investigating paedophilia. And he just started to tell me stories of people very high up in the entertainment industry, in government, in education, that are actively involved in organised child abuse and organised paedophilia. And I started to realise that this is the line of business where you can actually really make a difference. Oftentimes, the American political system has been accused of being short-sighted. American presidents are in office for 4 years. The next president, maybe 8 years, but typically 4, right? The next president comes in, undoes what the last one did. Now, compare that to China, who has a 50-year plan, and a 100-year plan, and a 300-year plan. I, however, don't think the U.S. is that short-sighted. I think they have a plan, and it's a long-term play, and it goes way beyond the term of a president. But it's a club. Look at Julian Assange. 98% of the political structure in the U.S. is corrupt. Now, I believe that in the 60s, there was a concerted effort to create a counterculture. You know, wonderful bands, some of my favorite, The Doors, all these sort of bands. Look at who the parents were of the band members. They're in the CIA. They're in other covert societies, and they're kind of creating this tune in, drop out, take some acid, begin to kind of move away from the traditional family values.
You know, George Washington, they might have won the battle against the British, but they lost the war. Because our presidents are mostly puppets.
Against each other. So where did this concerted
and they might be being controlled by the very people they lost their war to.
You know, if you mention a phrase like I just did, you're accused of being a right-wing racist. You know, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, a blue state, a Democrat my entire life. No, I'm not a right-wing racist. But this probably, this sort of intent of breaking down the family values probably started in the UK. I mean, with the Britpop invasion and a lot of the sort of then radical kind of lifestyles that were being introduced, not only just in Britain, but across Europe, later adopted in the US, and I would say accelerated from there. So, what does Illuminati mean?
The enlightened one?
It means enlightened. It's exactly the same thing. If you translate it Illuminati into English, it simply becomes enlightened. If you're an Illuminatus, which is the singular of it, then you're just enlightened. And if you're the Illuminati, you're a bunch of enlightened people. That's all that it means. The Bavarian Illuminati come into existence. We know the date that they were formed. The 1st of May, 1776. That is when a professor of law at the Catholic Jesuit-run Ingolstadt University in Bavaria founded, along with 5 other men, his Order of Perfectibilists, a.k.a. the Illuminati.
He said law now. He said law. It's your judges, your lawyers, your police.
Someone who was baptized was, guess what? An Illuminatus. Anyone who was initiated into any of the mystery religions, the spiritual secret societies of the Roman Empire, the Osinian mysteries, the Icenian mysteries, all of those people became, guess what? An Illuminatus. Illuminati had been around in one form or another as any people who were somehow generally accepted into a secret society that purported to give special information or doctrine which you were recruited into and in which you were initiated, and upon initiation you became enlightened.
I never liked the
secrets. You encounter this thing that has this mysterious name, and yet when you decode,
I don't like friends that keep secrets, women that keep secrets.
It's not mysterious.
It's never like the secrets.
Because it says you're enlightened. Enlightened to what? What's the Enlightenment? Okay, what's the big secret?
Right.
There was a nominally Islamic
I think we already know
society
for the most part.
personnel Afghanistan in the
Hey, Satan worshippers.
1700s, 1600s called the Russian. What does Washaniya mean? Enlightened. They believed in a kind of perfectible world. Everything would be turned into a single order, a communism of goods, equality of men and women. The whole is, no master above, no servant below. Why is it we want to create a better world? And I'm not just talking about the communists, I'm talking about the French. Why did the French Revolution stand? What was it? Liberty, equality, and brotherhood.
I always wondered what this saying meant. How's it go? As above, so below, or something like that. I think I know what that means now. As it is in heaven, or as it is above the firmament, so it should be below here on earth. Maybe that's what that means. I don't know.
By the way, those things, liberté, equality, and fraternité, was the motto of a Masonic lodge in Paris. That is a Masonic motto, which was adopted for the French Revolution. So, why would you argue with that? I say, if you tend to look at the communism for all of its great goals, almost everywhere it came into power ended up with a bloodbath. Is that because it's an idea that is inherently flawed? Or is it an idea which is consistently sabotaged?
He's way more credible than the other guy. I pick up energy out of people.
Is the flaw within ourselves? Is it simply because human beings cannot actually manage to come up with a workable system other than one based upon exploitation and brutality? Or is it because we're constantly diverted, and this is always in some ways consciously sabotaged by some other purpose? And in some ways these movements are thrown up to divert us away from something else. That's the big question, I suppose. When you think about it, it is so much easier to control the media, the television channels, the newspapers. They're all owned by the same 6 families.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just take 10 minutes and investigate it, you realize that's a lot easier to do than one thinks it is. And if you look at how bands from the 50s and 60s and 70s migrated and became sort of constructed by their parents, who are
just like racism,
these,
slavery is taught by the parents.
At some of the biggies in the entertainment world, Bob Dylan. To what does
I like the Bob Marley better, but
Satan. To these stories, Katy Perry. You have all these people who are Sam Smith. They were this way, not very successful, and now they're this way. And it's so clearly satanic. It's not even tongue-in-cheek. It's just pure, unadulterated evil is how it looks, right? And there's stories from whistleblowers who talk about the fact that you will take the master of a record and you'll bring it into a studio and you perform rituals on it. And there's sacrifices, and you don't just need Mel Gibson or Estevez to tell you that Hollywood is a place where children are sacrificed. Why are they sacrificed? They're tortured.
John Benet Ramsey.
And that adrenaline,
rest in peace,
produces adrenochrome. And adrenochrome is an elixir that gives you prolonged youth.
Vaporizing children.
This.
That's the biggest secret of the Illuminati, of the Freemasonry.
Everyone who attempts to
vaporizing children.
Whether it's Anthony Bourdain or whomever, commit suicide. Whilst a uniformed police officer on jailer duties, and there was a big epidemic in London in the early 90s of crack cocaine and heroin abuse. And a lot of the burglars, the street robbers, had heroin addictions, and to fund it, they would commit violent crimes involving theft. And I was speaking to one guy that was in for burglary, who was a heroin addict, and I said to him, what is it with heroin? Why'd you do it? It seems crazy. And he said to me, son, if you'd have had my life, you'd be doing it. And I didn't understand, I didn't comprehend. And he then told me that he'd been brought up in a children's home and had been sexually abused. And when he takes heroin,
Yeah, it's
it
tough.
takes all the emotional pain away. He said you'll find a lot of people like me that come from the same background.
He ain't lying.
What happened with one of
some of them using marijuana, some use alcohol, some use opiates, some use heroin.
And on this boat, there'd be parties would be held, and it was in the upriver, more affluent part of West London. And the names of the people were quite shocking. There was someone high up in the British education system. There was someone with political connections. And there were allegations that they were taking young boys from a quite prestigious boarding school and they were sexually abusing them. Within a day, I was approached by this senior paedophile detective, and he said to me, John, in any form of policing, when you do incredibly well, you're rewarded, you're promoted, you're elevated. In this world, the opposite happens. And he said to me twice, we had a Home Secretary, which is one down from the Prime Minister, and a person involved in crime and justice.
It must be the same with truck driving.
For the criminal justice system, for the courts, for the policing, etc. But we had this person twice, allegations of abusing young boys, and on both occasions the funding was stopped. Be very, very careful of being good in this sort of world. He said your name is already starting to get mentioned in the corridors. A day after that was said to me, the senior officer on the river unit drove me to one side and said, John, unfortunately, we can't afford to second you out anymore. I told the senior officer that I could no longer work under his command if that was the case. And a job had come out working with the vice unit, and it was involving prostitution, and it would give me back my detective status. I had to apply for it through the official channels, and this is where my first glimpse of secret societies comes in, because the senior officer said to me, show me the advert, and it came out in a notification, and the internal jobs would be on there with all the criteria, and it would be a reporting officer that you need to contact with in order to show an interest. I showed this senior officer this notice, and he said, I know this guy, he's in my lodge. He then rings this senior officer up, and he says to him, look, I've got one of my boys wants a job there, he's a good kid, I'm going to sponsor him, it'd be nice if he was to get this job. He put it on speakerphone, and the senior officer from the vice unit at the other end said, well, if he's listening, tell him to get down pen and paper and write the following things down. He gave me every question and every answer that I was going to be asked in the interview. On top of that, I would have a recommendation go with me. Lo and behold, I turned up for the interview. I did best out of every single applicant, and I got the job. My duties included going out into the streets of London and really rounding up and prosecuting street prostitutes. When I got to meet these girls, every single one had the same story.
They were
all harbouring very heavy crack cocaine and heroin addictions. They all had life-threatening illnesses such as contagious hepatitis, tuberculosis, and AIDS, HIV, every single one. They had all been brought up in the so-called United Kingdom's care system. Every single one had been sexually abused at home, put into care and been sexually abused in care. But one night on vice patrols, I came across a young girl. She was 14 years old. She was underweight, she was on heroin, she was on crack cocaine, she was small anyway, she looked about 9, and she was prostituting herself on the streets at 2, 3 in the morning in a very high crime rate area. I took her into protective custody and put her in the car, and I radioed through to the control room. I was told by my supervising officer to throw her out and tell her to F off. The reason being that this girl had scabies, a contagious mite, skin mite, and if I brought her in, that would infect the car, and it would also infect the secure room that we would put these young kids in. I refused to throw the girl out and took her into protective custody, and I was reprimanded for it. A few days later, I was asked to go and speak to a little girl that was in the children's home. She was 14 years old. She had alleged that she was one of the child prostitutes, and she had something to tell. She said she was being pimped out. My briefing was, go and see this girl. She's probably lying. She keeps making this allegation. We think it's malicious. Just get rid of her. She told me that her mother was a heroin addict and her mother would buy drugs off another prostitute. And that prostitute would then take the girl in exchange for the drugs, and she would then take her to a hotel, give her heroin, crack cocaine, and make her have sex with grown men.
That's messed up.
She said it's not just
That's
me,
in
John.
Leviticus. Let me
There's
pause
others.
that. That's also in Leviticus. I believe it's chapter 19, possibly verse 28, but it's within that Leviticus 19, 20 through 28, where the Lord forbids you to prostitute your daughters.
She gave me the name of another girl. I genuinely believe this girl.
That's why I believe in the living word of God. I believe in the Bible because the Bible was written so many years ago. So many years ago. And it speaks about stuff that's going on right now.
She gave me the name of another girl. I went and visited her. She told me the same. She in turn gave me the name of another girl, and on it went. This thing snowballed. Eventually we had nearly 36, it may be an exact figure, but around that, young girls, and there was a couple of boys, all the same story, all from the care systems, all being picked up, and the pattern was the same.
A real detective gonna put that type of stuff together, man. You
And
know.
they were traded for £2,000 a time. He started giving me information about the clients. That involved a local judge, a senior officer, someone high up in the music department of the BBC,
See?
and many other names.
See?
I put these names on the intelligence report and submitted it. Within an hour of putting this report on, I was dragged before the senior officer that ran the unit. This guy went on to become one of the most senior police officers in the United Kingdom and was even knighted. He turned around to me and he said, John, what the F in hell have you done? This can never ever get out. If you mention a word of this, we as a force, we are effed, past, present and future. This must never ever get out.
I already
the most
know.
important three things he then said to me, if you do continue to speak out about this, you are going to lose your home, your children and your job. Now that's quite a claim, and he said it with confidence, and it rocked me to the core. He said, any job, again, the second time this has happened in a very short period of time, any job you want, you're going to get. I'll make sure of it. I've been told, given assurances, to offer you any job. And I said, I still want to carry on working with children. I knew it was the only way in policing that you would make a difference. And he said, okay, but you must give me a gentleman's agreement. And he offered out his hand to me. And he said, you must never, ever look into child prostitution again. And I shook his hand. Okay, so I was moved. They scaled down the operation from 36 children to 2 children. Both of those 2 children ended up dead in mysterious circumstances.
That's wild, man. That's fucking crazy. Excuse me,
an epidemic of gargantuan proportion of child manipulation for the purposes of harvesting adrenochrome. So if NASA is a complete and utter fraud, they've never been to the moon, it was Stanley Kubrick, where is all that money gone? And why can't you go back to the moon all these decades later?
I say the same with St. Jude. That's a bold claim right there, though. That's a bold claim. It's been billions of dollars. I know for a fact millions of dollars that been into St. Jude research. You know, and they talk about the adrenochrome and the blood from these kids. And, you know, I just really wonder about St. Jude. There's something on my heart about that. I'm from Memphis. St. Jude is here in Memphis. I just really worry about that.
So the point is, all this money, where has it been going in all these decades? Deep underground military bases, perhaps. This is where these children are kept. This is where this industry exists. And if you look in recent times where, cargo ships like Evergreen get derailed, and you look at what the whistleblowers are saying, there's children inside those containers and adults tied to the side of the wall, and they're being harvested. Yet not just for organs, but for their blood. We're living in a world, whether it's a simulation or not, that is far darker. And going back to Canaanite times, this is nothing new, but how have we not seen it? They call it broadcasting for a reason. They only show us what they want us to see. The media just plays us as pawns. They're talking now about disclosure. There's UFOs. Okay, great, that's interesting. But tell us who was on Epstein's client list.
Right.
Why is there a member of the royal family as a buddy of Epstein? And so Prince Andrew, this goes right to the very top. The royal family in the UK. There's photos of Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein on the porch of the Queen's home in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Epstein made 20-some appearances in the Clinton White House. Can you explain that? So this is not just child trafficking. And if it was, how horrific is that?
Mm-hmm.
That kings and queens and presidents are involved. But why are the children being trafficked? And if you look at that, and you look into the adrenochrome,
Mm-hmm.
then it gets very dark indeed, and it's something that needs to stop.
I agree.
The mistrust that this has created in the general public is further exasperated by the fact that numerous private detective agencies have called these individuals and their organizations out time and time again, thus underscoring to the general public that their worst fears have been substantiated. I decided to hold a meeting of all concerned relevant agencies, parties and authorities. A very high up member of one of the two leading children's charities stopped me in my track and told me I should be looking into it, I was treading on toes, and I had to shut down the inquiry immediately. And she said she would be reporting me to a senior officer. That led me into a state of panic because I've been threatened with the home and the loss of my children.
I may not be able to finish recording this whole video, but I want to say something real quick. It's not just the royal family, it's the people in law enforcement, politicians, and it ain't just them. It's Satan. It's literally Satan. That's what it is. Satan feeds off the fear of children. I had something happen to me when I was a little kid. And I lived in Hirsch Village Apartments in North Memphis, in Tennessee. I had something happen to me, and I was afraid to tell my mom because I thought I was going to get beat. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And, it was a black dude, but it's tough to talk about stuff like that. But it happened, and I know that it was Satan because he feeds off that fear of the innocence. They feed off of that. And I was scared to tell my mama because back in them days, I could get whooped with a switch, belt, powder, stitching cord, broom, pretty much whatever my mom could find to pick up to hit me with. I may not be able to get through this whole video because I'm doing commentary with it, but I felt like I need to throw that in there because it's like these people feeding out the fear of these children too through these videos, through this video.
I then, at this point, received information about my two witnesses from the previous case. One in particular was been found dead in different locations, different times. But when I heard, the more recent girl, who was my key witness, it put me into a state of shock. I then made an allegation of corruption against this senior officer. The policeman take it seriously. After 3 attempts, I was granted an audience with a senior female detective, and that was my request because I would not see a male detective. She said, why? And I said, because, ma'am, you cannot roll up your trouser leg. And it made her laugh. Now, what I was referring to there was a first-degree Masonic ritual when an entered apprentice is initiated into Freemasonry, that they have to do the ritual with their trouser leg rolled up. Now, this may sound conspiratorial. There was a major government inquiry called the Hillsborough Inquiry involving the football club Sheffield when there was a terrible incident at this ground in Hillsborough where many people died. The investigation was deliberately covered up because of police incompetence and malpractice by Masonic interference. And that became official when they held the government inquiry. Every officer, every detective that was to go on that inquiry from an outside force other than local Yorkshire force of Hillsborough had to swear and make a statement that they were not involved in Freemasonry. So again, this is not conspiratorial at all. It has obstructed many an inquiry to such a degree that now, when they're held, officers have to make a declaration that they are not connected to Freemasonry. So I made this allegation of corruption and malfeasance in a public office, which carries a life sentence. I was taken seriously and told the investigation would be investigated thoroughly, and I was given vulnerable and intimidated witness statement, which means I was protected. Soon as the allegation was taken, the Metropolitan Police handed the inquiry over to a national crime agency. They, in turn, instead of investigating it, they rang up the senior officer involved and said to him, John Winters alleged that you have covered up child prostitution. He said, no, I didn't, and they accepted that without interviewing him, without investigating anything, without looking at any of the evidence, and then they shut the inquiry down. In doing so, I lost my protective status. As soon as I lost my protective status, the Metropolitan Police had then handed this investigation over to the National Crime Agency, who then went on to finish it. They boshed it, they quashed it, they stopped investigating it. There was no further action. I was then subject to a monumental bullying campaign. My wages were withheld. I went sick. I was meant to be on full pay. I went straight away almost onto no pay. So no income for nearly 3 years.
That's how they do. They try to.
I was arrested on 9 occasions.
Probably false arrests like me.
These ranged from theft of an A4 sheet of paper up to threats to kill and even Class A drug supply. The banks came to really take away, doing a financial assessment on me. But they look at taking away my home because I couldn't pay my mortgage. So bear in mind the threats.
They're narcissists. They are narcissistic. Anybody you know in life that's a narcissist, they are of Satan. They are of Satan. They can't take no for an answer.
In a horrific, life-altering accident, his spinal column was severed by 96% at a very high level on his vertebrae. He was in hospital. He was in a coma. His life expectancy was almost non-existent. I was called to the hospital one day. I didn't even have enough petrol in my car to get there. I got there on fumes. I was met by 3 consultants, took me into a side room, and they said, "We're ever so sorry, Mr. Wedger, but your son went into cardiac arrest.
They killed him.
He's been dead for 10 minutes.
They killed my mama too. They killed my mama.
7.5 minutes. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do."
He know what happened to his son, same way I know what happened to my mama. You know what I'm saying? They do that. You know, I was locked up on a bogus charge. I wanted to take it to trial. They shook me to the core. My mom died in the hospital just like his son died. You know, and we both know what happened. You know, they do that. They do that, and when she died, I took the probation. They came to me with papers, and I took it. I took it to get out of jail. Why? Because I had 2 sisters out there that I was in fear for their life. I was in fear for my family. That's just the truth. And I hate that he went through that. He lost his son. I really do.
Managed to get a minor brain algorithm, which warranted him time, the maximum amount of time on full life support, which was 5 days. His lungs were being fully inflated by 100%, which means that his alveoli, the little pockets, that transfer the oxygen into his bloodstream would burst due to the pressure, and it would render them almost useless. So 5 days was the maximum amount of time they'd give him. So I accepted the 5 days. I told them I had no reason to appeal it.
and I believe that they did everything that they could to resuscitate him and keep him in a good state. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days by his side. On the third day, I went into the chapel. I prayed to God, and I prayed to God for my son, and I offered myself up to Jesus Christ, that I'm prepared, like him, the shepherd, to go after the one lost sheep, and leave the flock behind. I said, I can't do it unless I get my kid back. I said, please give me my child back, and I will do everything I can to help the lost sheep. I went back and I kissed my son. I told him goodbye, and in doing so, he opened his eyes. He then moved his left foot. I then asked him to grab my hand with his left hand. He did that. He did likewise with his right hand. I then hugged him and told him I loved him, and he mouthed back saying he loved me too. I informed my colleague to tell the rescuing team to leave me alone, because I wasn't in the right state of mind, and especially if my son was to die, then I would want vengeance on the police. When I got home, I was confronted by 2 detectives who were outside my house. They then arrested me for child abandonment, saying that I left my 15-year-old son home alone without any food whilst I was by my dying son's side. So instead of showing me any sort of compassion, this is what they want. They wanted to take my youngest boy into care. He was at home alone with my 23-year-old, so there was no offences caused. I then told the police that they need backup, because if anyone touches my children, that I would bite lumps out of them. There's no way that they were getting out without major injuries to both of them. One of the officers, he actually asked me to explain what had gone on, and I told him. And he then told me that they'd actually been lied to, that the police had told my local force that I'd left my son in a state of abandonment and neglect, which was an absolute lie. But at that point, something had changed in me. I began to have the fortitude and the strength to fight back. And I made a pact with God that I would go out there and I would help. Within a few months, every single case that they had against me was put before the Crown Prosecutor, the government solicitors and barristers, to see whether it was viable to prosecute. Every single case was thrown out as no case to answer. The police then paid my pension, and they paid back all the money they took off me over the 3 years, and I was able to retire in peace. What I did then was use my abilities as a specialist investigator and an interviewer and an integrator to go out there and set up a project called The Voice for the Voiceless. Using my iPhone, I went and I spoke to victims and survivors of historic child abuse, especially from the care homes. I was inundated. My first interview got 2.2 million hits. I started getting contacted by serious and organised criminals and ex-criminals. One of the ex-criminals, become a very close friend of mine. And he said, John, there's one thing you're missing out. You need to start talking about a topic that no one's talking about, and that is the topic of satanic ritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
He told me that his sister had endured it while she was in a kids' home. She was taken to venues at night where hooded, masked people, men and women,
Who
would
were
lay her down
hoods?
and commit
KKK.
atrocities on this girl. When we start looking at why does the government not do something about this?
Because they're a part
We
of it.
get the same thing. A child, if it's divested from its mother and placed in an abusive environment, is going to get massively damaged.
Yep.
A survivor of abuse can go on to function very well academically.
The question is, how did you get onto the list? And how are you invited? And what is the purpose? Why do you have a Pole who may or not be a Marxist becoming the General Secretary and the Chief Architect of the Bilderberger Group?
I do want to go on record and say, I'm happy his son lived, but I had a strong feeling, inclination that, his son, life was probably at risk. I'm happy he lived. I shouldn't have probably spoke prematurely like that. No, I just know what I went through, and I thought he was leading up to a similar situation just with his son. And I pray for the children. I pray for the parents. Everybody need to get into the Holy Bible and read the Old Testament, Leviticus. Like I said, chapter 19. Read that whole chapter. It spoke to me. It really did. It spoke to me. And in Isaiah 43 verse 11, while I got time, that verse spoke to me. It's got me researching and learning more about Judaism. I'm self-proclaiming to be a Jew at this point in life because, God said what he said in the book of Obadiah. Everybody, he's going to bring some people down. He's going to cut some people off. Everybody's not going to make it. The way to heaven is narrow. And the way into hell is broad. It's more people going to perish than that's going to be saved. That's facts. And Jesus was not a Freemason. That's another little conspiracy or lie that they try to tell people. He was a stonemason. So just educate yourself. Stop relying on the church. The church is to indoctrinate you. Indoctrinate yourself. And pray to God for understanding, and stuff like that. I've had pastors look at me cockeyed before when I asked them about certain scriptures because they haven't indoctrinated themselves. They went through some type of a school, theology school or something like that, and they only learned what they were taught. But if they went through that thick book, the Bible is thick. It ain't just 10 pages. There's hundreds of pages in that Bible. That they start indoctrinating themselves, then they wouldn't have been looking at me funny when I started asking them about certain things in the Bible. And they've been pastoring over 30 years. The particular pastor that I'm talking about, Pastor Preston Poindexter in Memphis, Tennessee. Look him up. He's a good man. I'm not saying nothing bad about him. It's just I had asked him about something in Genesis, the very first book in the Bible. And he didn't know what I was talking about. He pretty much went on stage at the Memphis Union Mission, which is ran by Freemasons. I have proof of that. And he was on stage pretty much pastoring to a bunch of homeless men, and he described Jacob as Esau. He literally did that. He literally did that. And he's been pastoring over 30 years. I waited till that chapel cleared out, and I stayed in there with him and two older white men. Pastor Preston Poindexter is a black man. And I asked him, I said, how could you say that about Jacob when the Bible says God loved Jacob and hated Esau? And I said, the Bible describes Jacob as a quiet man that dwelled in tents. And he was like, where you read that at? In Genesis. And I was surprised he had to ask me that because he had been pastoring over 30 years. Me and my little baby sister had went up to his church when I was like 15 and my baby sister may have been like 9. We walked up to his church and we tried to get saved. We was living in the ghetto, but we always believed in God. And I had been knowing him, so when I seen him at the mission, Memphis Union Mission pastoring, I said, let me go talk to this man. And those two white men that were sitting down, that were with him, they knew that I knew. And they knew that Pastor Poindexter didn't know. And they knew. And I got to asking them. He said, well, they're my Bible scholars. That's what he called them, a Bible scholar. He said, those are my Bible scholars. And he pretty much said, they know everything about the Bible. So I got to asking them about Obadiah because they know what God said in Obadiah. In Judaism, they believe in Jesus, but they don't believe him as being divine. Only Christians believe that, as far as I know. Because Jews don't believe. They said Yeshua was a common name back in those times when Jesus lived. He wasn't. There were people crucified on crosses before Jesus. That come from the Romans. And I'm just trying to encourage people to educate themselves and stop following that doctrine, because you'll be looking like Pastor Poindexter up there when somebody asks you about a story that happened in Genesis, the first book in the Bible, and you look dumbfounded because You ain't never went and read it and researched it for yourself. Or God ain't never showed you, and when you pray for understanding, he never showed you the understanding where you was able to comprehend it because you intertwined with these so-called Bible scholars. Because the Bible scholars knew what I was talking about. They knew. And I tried to give them a pass because the book of Obadiah is the shortest book in the Bible. So I said maybe that's why most churches don't preach on it, because it's the shortest book in the Bible. So that's about the only pass I can really try to get them on that. But even that, though, you know, I still couldn't fully give them a pass because it's in the book, you know. And they said Jesus come back to fulfill, the Christians believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Meanwhile, in the Old Testament, the word Jesus is not mentioned one time. Not one time, only in the New Testament. Okay, so in Isaiah 43, verse 11, because I know most of y'all ain't going to look it up, but it pretty much says, even I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. God said that. You know, he said that. That's what he said. That was his words, not mine. You know. So I challenge people, and them Bible scholars knew I knew what I was talking about. They looked pretty dumb themselves. They probably been studying the Bible 40 or 50 years. Because they were older men. And, you know, they knew that they weren't supposed to be preaching about stuff like that in the Memphis Union Mission. So they was looking at me like, where's this young man getting this information from? Is he reading this on himself, by himself? Is somebody telling him this? It's in the book. But if you're too busy getting indoctrinated like Pastor Poindexter and a lot of other people that go to church and not reading for themselves, you'll never find it. God bless everybody.